All right, here I am outside the home of Medgar Evers, who was an NAACP leader and civil rights leader, and he pulled up here in his driveway one night, and the moment he got out of the car, he was shot in the back by where our bus is. Where our bus is right now, that behind there were not houses. And Medgar Evers arrived home, pulled up in his driveway, and the moment he stepped out of his car, he was shot in the back by a high-powered rifle. And his wife and kids waited inside the home. Medgar Evers bled to, he died right here in this driveway. The murderer finally was convicted in 1994. So,
you want to join us?
Y'all waiting on me?
Yeah.
Well, no.
We didn't know you were out there.
Oh, okay.
Don't invite you.
Yeah, okay, so you
Sorry,
were holding up the
guys.
party. But anyway, this is where Medgar Evers brought his family after he became the first field secretary for the NAACP. His responsibilities were great. But he came into this area, onto this street, because this is your first, if you want to call it a subdivision, that's what they called it then. These are your homes, the first homes, as they call houses for middle-class professional blacks that were allowed to happen during that time. But Medgar came in here, he said, not that I considered myself middle class. He said, but I had a connection with the two young men who were building houses on this street. There were two young black World War II veterans who had owned this little strip of land for a long time. They had been trying to build houses for what they call middle-class professional blacks, but were not allowed to do so because this little street here was sandwiched between two white streets, and that just wasn't going to happen. Whites lived on the street that you're coming in on. When Medgar was here, the first 4 houses on the end were not there yet, and whites were moving in back here. But Medgar came in here, as I said, he said, I had a connection with those two guys. They're veterans, and so am I. That's why I'm coming in here. But we talk about how Medgar grew up and how he was able to come into it, and when he came into this neighborhood. He grew up in a little old town up near where Elvis Presley grew up, but under total different circumstances. But Medgar also grew up with whites, around whites. Naturally, if you did, you associated with them, especially the young kids. Even the adults associated to a certain extent. And that's what kind of set Medgar off on his trek, if you will, or the path that he took. He said, I lived up around these white kids. We associated together. We hunted and fished. He said, they were my buddies. He said, but when I got to be a certain age, I had to leave those guys. And I had to begin calling kids my age and even younger, white kids, Mr., Mrs., saying yes, sir, and no, sir. Didn't understand that. Didn't know why it had to be that way, because these were my buddies that I had played with. He said, and I talked to my daddy about it. My dad would tell me, well, Medgar, that's how things are. Does not make you less of a person because of how people treat you, not if you know who you are. But there are some things you're going to have to do to survive in this kind of environment. But Medgar said, he said, before I was 12 years old, he said, I had witnessed 2 lynchings. He said, one was a friend of my dad's. He said, my dad and I were in the woods one morning. We came upon these men lynching one of my father's friends. He said, I thought it was so cruel. I asked my dad, why would they do that to him? He said, Medgar, that's what they do. But what you must do to survive in this kind of environment. And then he talked about, he said, after they lynched him, they drug him downtown to show him off. And this is working with Medgar's mind. And then he said there was a 10-year-old kid who goes to the Mississippi White Fair, the state fair. He said the fair would come in, and when I was growing up, it'd do the same thing, but it would come into your area at different times. It would operate 2 weeks, a week or better, that kind of thing, and then it would be whites only. Then they'd close it down, take away some of the wonderful rides and activities, and they'd open it back up and it would become the colored fair. Medgar said, this kid doesn't tell anyone. He goes to the White Fair. He said, they lynched that kid and they put him on a fence. He said, they leave him there until his body began to deteriorate, take him down and bury him. He said, but they leave his clothes right there because that was a warning to both races. He said, because both races passed that kid, nobody talked about it. Medgar, it has messed with his mind, so he wants to get away. So he, at the age, as I said, the age of 16, he quits high school, goes into World War II. And he talked about traveling, defending America. He said, the things I saw, he participated in the Normandy invasion. And he just talked about a lot of other stuff. He said, while I was over there, it didn't seem to matter too much about the color of my skin. He said, sure, we were segregated. He said, but nothing seemed to happen as it was happening at home. He said, okay, I do my time and I get out of service and I come home. He said, that stuff starts all over again. He talked about trying to register to vote on his 21st birthday because back then you had to be 21. He said, my brother, who was also a veteran, and some other veterans and I, he said, we go downtown to register to vote. He said, these white men run us off with shotguns. He said, we go home and get ours. And when we come back, he said, the number had tripled. He said, and an old white lady was sitting in a truck and she stepped out and walked over and said, son, it ain't worth you losing your life over this. One day, you'll be able to vote. Medgar said, it made me get serious though, and I began to think, and I said, let me do something. So he gets into Alcorn College, now University. At that time, Alcorn had the high school and then the college. So he gets in and he majors in business administration. He plays football, he runs track, he starts some business venture. He does a lot of stuff while he's there. He's a little bit older than the average college student. But one of the most important things we think he did, he organized the first debate team. And he was the first black and he was the first black to debate at Millsaps College, then an all-white college here in Jackson. And when you read about Millsaps, even though it was all white, Millsaps students got involved in the movement as well. But anyway, so he met his wife, he met Myrlie when she was a freshman. And so when he finished, they got married and they moved to an all-black town up in the Mississippi Delta called Mount Bayou, Mississippi. Mount Bayou, as I said, no one lived there, as they said, but colored folks. And Mount Bayou had this nice hospital in it that served the surrounding areas. And there was a young black man up there running that hospital. But also, his name was T.R.M. Howard, but also T.R. was rich to be a black man at that time. This guy, I can't think his name right now, did a book on T.R. a couple of years ago, and he titled his book, T.R.M. the Cocky S.O.B. Because T.R. was, as they said, to be a black man, he was filthy rich. Didn't take no stuff off of anybody. But he had some self-help programs going up there, and he was helping the whites as well as the colors. But Medgar went up there to sell insurance. He said, T.R. invited me. Medgar, why don't you come up here and sell insurance for me? Medgar said, that's what I went up there to do. He said, but T.R. pulled me in, if you will, and began teaching me how to organize. He said, I started selling insurance in a little old town called Clarksdale, and I saw how people were living. He said, while I was selling my insurance, he said, I was talking to them about voting and education, because I knew those were two things that would bring them out of their conditions. He said, and right away they told me, well, Mr. Evans, they don't let us vote. And then he said, that in a little town there was a couple of schools. He said, so I just continued to talk. He said, then I left the town and went out onto the big farms, those things they call plantations. He said, and what did I see out there? He said, the conditions under which people were living, he said, I'm talking about whites as well as blacks, and then the term was coloreds. He said, was so terrible. He said, some of those people didn't even have wooden floors nor windows in their homes, and here I am pushing insurance. I felt bad. I began talking to them about two things that I knew would bring them out of that condition: voting, education. Mr. Evans, they don't let us vote. Mr. Evans, this person, a mind this, a mind that, tried to register to vote. They disappeared. We've never seen them since, or they were beaten or murdered, or that kind of thing. He said, I just continued talking to them. Then they told me, ain't no schools out here. If so, we go to school so many weeks and we right back out on these farms. He said, I just continued talking to them. until I made a huge mistake. I gave a young black man a voter registration application. He couldn't read nor write. He thought it was for insurance. So he takes it to his boss to help him complete the app because he wants insurance. And when the man sees what it is, he gets together with the rest of the plantation owners, and they won't let Medgar come back. Medgar said, I told him, that's okay. We can still change some minds up here. Let's do some boycotts. He said, they asked me, what's that? And I told him, well, you know, they let us buy the gas and won't let us use their bathrooms. We go into their stores, they shoot the prices up when we walk in, and sometimes they make us stand in line till all the white folks are served. So we're going to get people who got cars to come in here and take you outside the area. This is called a boycott. Medgar said, they said, where are we going to shop? He said, we're going to get these people to come in here and they're going to take you someplace to shop. He said, we began to do that, and those people began to act a little bit better toward us. Then he talked about when the first educational act came about. He said, I always wanted to be a lawyer. The only school in the state of Mississippi that offered a law degree was the University of Mississippi, now Ole Miss, of course, and they wouldn't let him in. And this is when the national NAACP had been watching him, so they didn't have a field secretary. So they said, Mr. Evers, how about becoming field secretary for the Mississippi NAACP? He agreed to take the job because he needed the money. He has a family. He needed the money, and he was already into organizing and stuff. But to do that, he got to come into Jackson. And he comes in here, as I said, on this street, and he select this lot. He said, because I came in here, there were 2 veterans who were trying to build houses on this little street. But they wouldn't let them do it because this one street, as I said, was sandwiched between 2 white streets. But they finally got approval, and Medgar came in here and selected this lot. He said, I did that because there was a house already standing on the left and one was on the right. He said, and for safety purposes, I nestled mine between the 2. And he came in here with a wife and 2 kids. 3rd one was born here. He said, do this to me, make these changes to my house. He said, all bedrooms on the east wall at this time, raise those windows a little higher than the other house like this, because I'm bringing a wife and my 2 kids in here, and that's where the bedrooms are. And then he asked them, don't give me a front door. So you drive around, only house in the area without a front door. He said, because I'm going to teach my kids, I don't care who they're riding with, they got to come under the carport and let them out. And I want them to get out of the car on the passenger side using the wall in the car as a means of protection. Come down that wall and right into the house. Well, the first year they were here, someone shot through this window. So after that, they'd come down the wall into the house, eat, and retreat to the back. When someone shot through the window, Mrs. Evers said, Medgar said to her, we know furniture is not going to block bullets, but put your piano on one corner. And on the other corner, stand a couch on end. That's just so people can't look right into the house. And then take the kids' beds down and put the mattresses on the floor. She said, that's what we did. 2nd and 3rd time it was shot into was through their bedroom window. She said, we all got on the floor then. But when you go back there, there's a bed up. That's because Castle Rock Entertainment, Rob Reiner, executive producer, director, used this house for some of the scenes, the movie The Ghost of Mississippi, and they put a bed up back there in her room. She didn't quite like that when she came. Then she talked about Medgar traveling so much and there being alone a lot. She said somebody tried to come in on us through the back door one night. We simply pushed the refrigerator across the back door and left it that way. Then one night someone threw a couple of days before Medgar was assassinated, someone threw a Molotov cocktail under her car and set the car ablaze. Other things happened, but she said those were like the major. Then she and the neighbors, because quite a few of them are still here, began to talk about the night of the assassination. You know, it was June 12th, 1963, coming up to what we call Freedom Summer. Freedom Summer is when all of these young people came in here, with some older ones too, came in here and went up in that Mississippi Delta trying to set up, get people registered to vote. They became investigators, getting people to donate books and clothing for the people up there. This is the next year, as it says, 64. This is when your 3 civil rights boys were murdered up in Philadelphia, Mississippi. The 2 white boys from New York and the black boy from up there in that area. So that's what they were preparing for. But John Kennedy was our president at that time. And Kennedy went on television that night and delivered what a lot of people, especially the whites, called his first civil rights speech. What Kennedy said angered a lot of people. He was talking about the rights of all people and how things had to change and that kind of thing. And it made a lot of people angry, but as they would say in the movement, things were happening anyway, hot and heavy and breaking out. So Medgar watched Kennedy's speech in his office. He left there and went downtown to a church for a mass meeting. And a lot of people said the assassin, Byron D. Beckwith, and two of his friends were sitting on a back pew. And nobody paid them any attention, which you would not necessarily have done so because you had a lot of whites involved, and naturally they would be at the meetings. Medgar left there, went picked up these T-shirts that the marchers were going to wear the next day. On the front of the T-shirt said, "Jim Crow must go." Mm-hmm. And he picked the shirts up and came home and pulled into his driveway. Mrs. Evers already under the carport. He's way behind her. He gets out of his car and goes to his trunk and get these T-shirts. And when he turns to come under the carport, Byron D. Beckwith, the assassin, is waiting for him all the way across Missouri. When you go out, there's a beige house over there with blue shutters. It was not there then. In fact, they're doing some work, so we're taking stuff down. But in fact, this is what it looked like across the street over there that night where Beckwith was. You can see it a little bit later. But when Medgar turned to come under the carport, Beckwith stood and fired with a 30-06 Enfield rifle. And the bullet catches Medgar in his back under his right shoulder, going through him, through the last pane of the window. Mrs. Evers said, the kids and I are sitting on the floor. They always did, so they'd be lower than the window. She said, we're watching a rerun of John Kennedy's civil rights speech. She said, we hear Medgar when he drive up. He doesn't come right in, so we just continue to watch television. She said, then we hear this loud bang. She said, we hit the floor, began crawling to the bathroom, because the kids had told Medgar, should something happen, the safest place in the house is the bathtub. She said that's where they were headed, and I was crawling right behind them until I hear a loud thump. I don't know what it is, she said, but it made me jump and run for the door, and I knew better than that. Medgar didn't train us that way. She said, but when I threw open the door, he's staggering, coming around my car. She said, then I hear two more shots. She said, I slammed that door and I run back in. I was so scared I thought they were still shooting at us. But the second and third shot she heard came from the man next door, Mr. Wells. His kids were in bed, and at that time he had a 12-year-old daughter named Paulette. And Paulette said the first window, that was our bedroom. She said, and I had a top bunk. We had bunk beds. She said, I saw Mr. Evers when he drove up. He got out of his car and he went to his trunk and came up out of there with an armful of white stuff that I learned later was T-shirts. She said, then I heard this loud shot. She said, Mr. Evers was falling and struggling and hanging on to the poles and the cars. She said, I was so scared. I was just jumping up and down in my bed screaming. And my daddy ran in there, looked out the window, saw Mr. Evers, got his pistol and walked out on his porch and fired 2 shots in the air. Those were the other shots Mrs. Evers heard. Mr. Wells said, I wasn't aiming at anybody. He said, I was just hoping to run whoever it was away. He said, I didn't see anybody. I only saw Medgar. Another man named Mr. Quinn lived all the way across that street over there on into another little area. And he said, when I heard the shots, I just started running into the neighborhood. He said, but when I made it this far, I saw Mr. Wells under the carport struggling with Medgar. He said, I stopped and I helped bring him in. He said, we brought him in here and placed him right here on the floor. Mrs. Evers said, we waited on an ambulance that never came for Medgar. Some said one was called, some said one was not called. She said, but no ambulance ever came for him. Mr. Wells then, she said, after a little bit, said to her, Myrlie, give me a mattress. And he took a mattress off of Rena's bed, which was the first room, and put Medgar on that mattress and put him in Mr. Wells' station wagon. And Mrs. Evers said, Mr. Wells said to her, I'm going to the closest hospital and the best. He considered it the best because at that time it was basically all white. The basement was reserved for emergency colors. But once you stabilized them or whatever happened, you had to ship them on out. Mr. Wells said, when we made it to that hospital, he said 2 people came out and looked in the station wagon and saw Medgar and began apologizing. You brought him to the wrong place. This is not a colored hospital. If we treat him, we can lose our license, Jim Crow law. We don't have any blood for transfusion. Again, Jim Crow law. You didn't mix white and colored blood. No colors on staff except one nurse, Mrs. Emma Matthews. And Mrs. Matthews is 95 years old now, still living on State Street. He said, but after a little bit, a white man stepped up and said, if they let you bring him in, I'll work on him. And after some more talk, they, meaning the people in the hospital, got Medgar and took him in. Medgar's doctor made it there, A.B. Britton, been dead now about 2 years, a little better. Dr. Britton said, I went there just in case they had said there is no doctor. He said, but at that time, I knew I didn't have permission to work there either. He said, I'm a colored man. He said, but I could admit my patients. He said, but once they entered the door, I had nothing else to do with them. He said, but they didn't know who Medgar was until I made it there. They didn't tell him who he was, possibly on purpose. But Dr. Britton said, when I made it there, he said, I asked them, do you know who this is? And they said, no. And I said, this is Medgar Evers. He said, and one of the doctors said, oh my God, we got Medgar Evers in here. But Dr. Britton said they really tried. They really tried to save Medgar. So we asked him, do you think they would have made it had he would have made it had they worked on him as soon as he got there? He said, I doubt it. He said, that's why we all were so amazed to have access to Medgar, that he was alert. He said, Medgar was talking, making good sense at first. He said he began to lose it after about 15 minutes. But Dr. Britton wouldn't allow us to say Medgar died. He said he lived 45 minutes after getting there. And we know that he didn't make it because Dr. Britton said half of Medgar's chest was missing. But the bullet caught him in his back on his right shoulder, went through the last pane of the window. As you go through this area, you will see photographs from that night. Through the wall, that's the bullet hole in the wall. On into the kitchen, exiting over, we have a toaster there. She had a toaster oven. Hitting her refrigerator dead center because she got it across the back door. Ricocheted from there over to the countertop. Underneath the radio over there, you'll see a little nick in the wall where it hit, came back down, resting underneath this big watermelon she has on the countertop. This is where it wound up. Mrs. Evers always said, that bullet split my melon and went on over into the sink. Well, Mr. Fred Sanders, who was an amazing man to talk to, who was the policeman. All policemen were white at that time. Mr. Fred Sanders was the lead policeman who really, they solved the case right here in Mississippi. He told me, he came a couple of years ago and spent half a day with me. But he said that we solved the case right here. He said, but they didn't want Mississippi to get the credit for it. He said, J. Edgar Hoover was, you know what he was. He was on the FBI. But anyway, he said, my superior got a call from Robert Kennedy, who was Attorney General at that time, saying, turn your information over to J. Edgar Hoover. And Mr. Sanders said, I want you to know, had we waited on J. Edgar Hoover to solve the crime, it never would have gotten served. He said, but never would have gotten saved. He said, but we solved the problem right here. We solved the murder. Then he began to talk about that night. He said, I told you whites lived on that end. He said, 4 white kids came to me running when I made it into the community. He said, when we got the call and came into the community, he said, the people were in here, both black and white. He said, I don't know where they came from. He said, but they were here. He said, but Mrs. Evers was under the carport with friends. She wouldn't let us in at first. She was screaming, where were you when we needed you? You all helped cause my husband's death. And she was saying that because the police Medgar had been beaten up by police twice, but they would be trailing him, but some would say it was for his own good. But he said she wouldn't let us in. He said, but those 4, he said, was 4 white kids came to me running, 2 girls and 2 boys. He said, and one of the boys ran up to me and said, sir, whoever did it was over in these bushes. Because we were walking our girlfriends home and the bullet went right by my ear. Whoa. Mr. Sanders said, I told them, go home and tell your parents and meet me back here first thing tomorrow morning. He said, because at that time, he said, you know, all we had was a pistol, a flashlight, and a blackjack. He said, those kids came back. He said, and one of the boys who kept over here, sir, walking with me. He said, we walked a little piece. He said, the grass was all, there was a spot where the grass was all matted down. He said, a lot of cigarette butts, candy, and gum wrappers. He said, and I said, this is where the person was lying in wait. He said, the kid is still saying, over here, sir. He said, we go a little further. He said, there's a small tree, and one of the limbs had the bark knocked off. He said, I surmise this is where the person placed his gun. He said, the kid is still saying, over here, sir, over here. He said, we walk a little further. the kid began screaming, "Here's a gun, sir, here's a gun." He said, was resting right up in the honeysuckle vine. He said, that's where we got it from. He said, but when Mrs. Evans finally let us in, he said, I followed the path of the bullet and I came looking for it. He said, I saw the hole in the wall, I saw the refrigerator dented. He said, but I didn't see a bullet. He said, but on that counter, she had this huge watermelon. He said, and it was just dripping. He said, I touched the melon and the bullet slid right on over into the sink. He said, that's where we got it from, out of the sink. Then he talked about they cleaned the melon up, and as you go through, you're going to see photographs from that night where the melon was and all of that. But anyway, he talked about all of the time they put in behind Beckwith. We know that it took them 31 years to find Beckwith guilty. And when they found him guilty, it was not necessarily a murder in Medgar, but he robbed Medgar Evers of his civil rights. Sentenced Beckwith to life in prison, he spent a lot of time right downtown in the city jail. Mrs. Mary Ann Follows, the white girl, well, she's not a girl anymore, young lady who wrote the book that movie was based on. Her book was titled The Murder of Medgar Evers, The Trial of Byron D. Beckwith, and the Haunting of the New South. She said, this is where I interviewed Mr. Beckwith, even all of this time later. Mr. Beckwith's doors were not locked. People visited him, brought him whatever they wanted, except they couldn't bring a gun in. Eventually, someone rumored that they saw him walking outside, which I doubt. But then they sent him to Rankin County Penal Farm, a little penal farm not to about 30 miles from here. Placed Mr. Beckwith under 24-hour suicidal watch. A lot of the people had been here who was responsible for him. He wouldn't eat any dark foods. Said bring him a Coke, dark drink. You hear him screaming outside the facility that they were trying to kill him. Eventually Beckwith died, and he died in the same hospital Medgar died in. Just bigger and better, the University Medical Center now. He's buried up in the mountains up in Tennessee, because that's where he had fled after that second trial. Mrs. Evers she and Medgar had 3 kids. She was pregnant with the 4th, lost that one because of all of the trauma. She wanted to get out of here. She was angry and she was afraid. And she said, I had some friends in California. So they kept encouraging me to come there. Took about a year to sell out stuff and raise monies to get out of here. And then the national NAACP stepped in and helped her relocate to California, Claremont. That's where she still is. So we said those friends must have been white. She's still the only black in the neighborhood. Her kids, the oldest, Daryl didn't talk for a long time after he saw his dad in the driveway. Mrs. Evers said after we got to California, this white coach got him and began working with the sports and brought him back. But Daryl changed, became very quiet, and he did have a family. Daryl died in 2001. Mrs. Evers said he had colon cancer. We found out it was too late. Rena, the daughter who was 8, Rena's back here in Jackson. She and her mom founded the Myrlie Evers Institute. They deal with young people, especially young boys, trying to turn their lives around, that kind of thing. But Rena runs, they got 3 different chapters. Rena runs the one that is in Mississippi, so she lives here most of the time. The baby boy, James Van Dyke, he is still in California, he and his family. Mrs. Evers, still in California. She comes here, used to come quite often, and since the Civil Rights Museum has opened, she's been here twice, I think, to Jackson twice. I know she opened the museum, she did the opening speech, if you will. The first room was the daughter's room, the second room was the Evers room, and the third room was the boys' room, where you see the mattresses are actually on the floor was the boys' room, but they all were on the floor. In the, we call it the vision room, a lot of writing and photographs and that kind of stuff, and you are allowed to take pictures, because I know if Tarp Service take it over, they don't let you take pictures. House this small, they might not even let you enter. They will do small places, they usually do a walk around and open up the windows and let you look in. But anyway, if you have questions, I'll try to answer them for you, or you can ask later.
Thank you.
What's your question?
Is the furniture in the house authentic, or
Is it in
is it authentic? Was it actually theirs?
No. She sold most of her. She sold quite a bit of her furniture. We know who she sold some of it to. But when Castle Rock did the house, we didn't know at that point because they probably would have bought it back from them. But this was placed in here by Castle Rock. But this is basically, when you walk through and look at other photographs, this is what her house kind of looked like that
Alright. Cool, thank
at
you.
that time.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What book or where could I get the information basically that you were sharing with us? Where can we find that?
Oh, it's so many books. I used to have a listing of books. Let me see. You can, The Ghost of Mississippi by Mary Ann Bowers. Well, it's really, the book is called The Murder Medgar. It was the trial of Byron D. LeBeck and the haunting of the New South, but I think it is The Ghost of Mississippi. You go online, there's a lot of them. There's one by a young man that just did it about 4 years ago, just simply titled Medgar Evans. And his name is Williams. What's his first name? Robert. Walker. I'll think of it in a minute. But his last name is William. But then I'm going to do another listing. I've run out of it. There are about 10 or 15 books.
Okay.
Yeah. But in a lot of the stuff, as I say, you pull it up, it's out there. And they will give you the names of books and stuff.
Yes.
Joan Trump Powell Mulholland, her son Low-Key did a book on her, and I think it's called A Simple Woman Named Joan Trump Powell Mulholland. She was the first white to get a degree, supposedly. First white to get a degree from Tougaloo College.
From what college?
Tougaloo. You never heard of Tougaloo College?
What is it called? Tougaloo.
Tougaloo, meaning
You gotta step your game up.
I do.
Tougaloo College. We don't have a picture of Tougaloo on here, but this is just a little something we put together. I had to make copies because I'm waiting on my other brochure. But Tougaloo is a historically black college. You ever heard of what's the college in Washington D.C. that Howard University?
Yes.
Sister college.
Okay.
Fisk University.
Fisk, yes.
Yeah. You had about 500. You have probably about 100 and something now. But when slavery ended, what was that, about 300 years ago? When slavery ended, this white thing called American Association, it was like ministers. A lot of people got together. The American Association got together and they founded about 450 institutions for what they called the training of Negroes. Some were to train teachers, some were to train doctors, some were simply to teach people how to farm, some were supposed, in essence, they were open to civilize us. Okay? And so Tougaloo is one of those. Tougaloo is known for turning out lawyers and doctors. We have a program, we have a connection in an exchange program with Howard University, and soon, but not necessarily, not only Howard, but a Brown University, and soon with Harvard. We already have kind of an exchange program with Harvard, but it's picking up more right now. And so we sit on about 450 acres, our campus. A little wooded campus up here. But anyway, so at the turn of the century, when all of these places were founded, as I said, they were founded by whites. Okay. And for different purposes. Mm-hmm. And so, because they were private, the majority of them were private. Tougaloo was private. And as I said, we are a gated campus. And during the terrible years, people would come to Tougaloo and perform and raise monies for the movement and that kind of thing. And they wouldn't perform out in the city. When Robert Kennedy came to Mississippi, he wouldn't perform, he wouldn't speak out in the city. He would rap bunch, all of these people. And so because Tougaloo is a huge campus, helicopters would land on Tougaloo's campus with movie stars and all of this. Do you ever watch 60 Minutes?
Yes.
Last Sunday, what's her name? Oh God, the white girl. That was a country singer like. She performed at Tougaloo and would come in and they raise money for the civil rights movement. And so that's kind of like, that's Tougaloo's history.
Okay. Do you work at Tougaloo?
I do. The Tougaloo owns the house right now, and
okay.
I do the house basically. But I used to do the archives. I went to Tougaloo doing something else, but because of my interest in civil rights and because I met Meg Evans in college and that kind of stuff, so I started doing it. They asked me to do the tours, and I've been doing them ever since. But I was trying to think of the white girl.
Yes. Who graduated, was the first to graduate?
Oh, but Joan Trompowell, yeah, I know her, Joan. But, when the civil rights workers came into Mississippi, they call them, they called them civil rights workers, but when the Freedom Riders came in, Joan Trompowell, Mulholland, and several of her classmates had applied to, after they, made the ruling that the schools were to be integrated.
Yes.
She and a couple of her classmates had applied to schools in Mississippi and basically black colleges in the South. These are white girls, boys. But before she was to come in in the fall and enroll. But then this thing broke loose, the demonstrations and all of this. So she came in early as a Freedom Riders, but she did enroll in Tougaloo and get her degree from there. She's the only white Delta that they know. They let her. But anyway, but she came in and got involved. And then this is when all these Freedom Riders came in here. I mentioned earlier there were two white boys that were murdered up in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I know you read about them.
And Schwanner.
And
Goodman. Yeah.
Goodman. Cheney was the black boy. But anyway, so all of these white kids came in here and went up in the Delta and just saw how things were. And they put the word out. They started soliciting clothing and all of that for people up there because they were in dire conditions. And so Medgar was like the leader. He was the first field secretary for the NAACP, but they would allow him to come to Tougaloo because Tougaloo was private. He couldn't speak anywhere else at these state places, owned by the state, these schools, but he could come there and speak. And Tougaloo is gated. You got to come through a gate to get onto that campus. And so he became the advisor to those students. And then when you were out there demonstrating and that kind of thing, and the police got in behind you, they used to have that thing, if I can just make it through the gates, they wasn't going to find you in those woods. It's 500 and some acres up there. And so that then Tougaloo's faculty and staff got involved because the majority of Tougaloo's faculty were either Indians, white. You had some blacks, but they came out of these different areas, places, and then you had when the Germans, fled Germany after when the Holocaust came about. These people settled in historically black colleges. So we had Berinsky up there, Ron Chanel, who was art, who fled and came. They settled in black colleges and they settled in black neighborhoods. Whites wouldn't accept them. So, so they became advisors to the students as well. And so that's why I took it didn't just a few years ago began to being supported, not supported, but getting aid or help from white businesses. They didn't support Tougaloo College. These are militants, so to speak. But I'm trying to think of his name, who was all the Tougaloo's presidents were white, except about 40 years ago. And then you had your first black president, who was also a graduate of Tougaloo College. But so that's why these schools, historically black schools that were run mostly by whites and that kind of stuff was not really accepted. Yeah, but as I said, we talked about that's how they got involved because Berinsky had been a judge, a lawyer first, then a judge in Germany. Then he came to the United States and got a got a second degree as a judge. I mean, it became a judge and then a lawyer. You know, and he was like an advisor to those kids. Saying, you're within your rights if you do this, this, and this. So you'll have. You had a lot of, as I said, children who never sit well.
Yes.
In the mouths of the taste of whites because of what they were doing. You had whites involved, but a lot of them was involved undercover. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's how I got involved in that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
And thank you a lot for the details about how Medgar set up his house. I'm a veteran as well, so I just see a lot of the sense and the reasonableness of him doing that and understanding he's a very defensive-minded kind of security because of his veteran service. So I appreciate the details about that. It's very interesting.
It's the double consciousness
Right.
that blacks have to
Have to
live
live with.
with.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's also like, his training in the military thought this is the best way to do this.
Yeah, I've had so many people to talk about the type of the gun rifle and all that. I had a young man here, he ain't so young anymore, but it was yesterday, he was talking about the gun and all that, and they got the gun down there. Now, when they did an exhibit, I
Do
have
a trip around the house really quick.
That's why they're not in the document, or not in the document, in the movie, and remember there's only 2 kids?
Yeah.
I was wondering, because, yeah,
No, she said she's all 21. I don't know.
I don't know.
Who's Clyde Kenner? So you don't even know if that's his son.
It just makes sense that that would be who it was.
Was this the Medgar Evers and Myrlie's room?
I don't know whose room. It has to be one of the children room, right?
No, the children's room.
Oh yeah, you're right. I
I
think
thought
this
their room
one.
was the
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
back there, so this one is
Medgar Evers' room and his wife. He and his wife's room. This is Medgar Evers' room?
No, she said this is the daughter's room.
The daughter's room?
Yeah, and the other one is.
the 2
Okay.
sons.
No, this is the daughter's. The other one is the Evers, and then the sons are.
I had
Oh,
kids, so it would have been hard.
Yeah, it's hard on kids moving around.
This is Medgar Evers' room, actually. So the first room was the daughter's room.
I was always making bonds and breaking bonds.
Yeah.
After I kept on.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, this is the children's room. They had the beds to be lower than the window panes so that if anything, bullet shot through or anything like that, their children would be lower than the windows. Restroom here. And backyard. I'll go out, maybe try to go outside to see that. Here's the kitchen.
Oh my God. And I remember I brought my son over to SMU because we really wanted him to go. And he did go to college. He went to UT, but he didn't. But yeah, SMU was just a good opportunity. I mean, he was smart as a young black man.
All right. Again, home of Medgar Evers.
The monument in Selma is saying it was a terror attack.